There's a phrase we don't see, hear, or say often enough, and I'd love if you could repeat it after me. I don't know. We do read, hear, and think that we live in an increasingly complex world. More interconnected, more moving parts, more difficult to understand, predict, or control. Yet we crave simple answers. We seem to believe either that the questions we want answered are not complex, or that there genuinely are simple answers to complex problems. Now, to be sure, there is a simple, accurate, and honest answer to even the most complex question, which is, I don't know. Except that's an unsatisfying answer. And as a psychologist, analyst, and writer, I want to know why it feels that way. I've watched complex stories inexplicably simplified throughout my life. I grew up in Mumbai. It's a city that's been continuously targeted by terrorists. One of the biggest attacks took place in March 1993. Terrorists set off a number of bombs across the city. 257 people died. 713 were injured. My mom's office was blocks away from one of the bombs. At my sister's school, windows shattered from a blast. My school was a short walk from the stock exchange where one of the first bombs went off. I was in kindergarten at the time. I didn't know what to make of all of this. I was confused. I was scared. Turns out the attacks were organized by a local gangster named Tiger Memon, who has eluded capture so far. But police did arrest a number of his siblings, including Yaqub Memon. Yaqub Memon's trial and appeals process lasted for over 20 years. Last April, he was sentenced to death. 2 days before he was to be executed, the Supreme Court of India convened at 2:30 a.m., which they've never done before, and denied his final appeal. So Yaqub Memon was hanged at 6:30 a.m. on the 30th of June, 2015. Now, in those 20 years, I had graduated college, then law school. I knew a lot more about the case. I knew that Yaqub's role was a matter of controversy. There was debate within the legal community, not necessarily about his participation, but whether he merited capital punishment. I participated in that debate. Once he was hanged, though, Yaqub Memon was reduced to a single label: convicted terrorist. Anybody who still debated the specifics of his case became a terrorist sympathizer. The tone of debate changed literally overnight. On 29th June, it was a complex issue. On 30th June, it was inexplicably simple, even to some people who were familiar with the legal intricacies right until that moment. How did that happen? Emotion, habit, and ignorance. The first of these reasons is emotion. Emotions are powerful motivators. Negative emotions are generally stronger than positive ones, and fear is perhaps the most powerful motivator of all. The social psychologist Aryeh Kruglansky found that uncertainty is closely associated with fear, which is to say, we are strongly motivated to avoid uncertainty. He conducted a number of experiments. You're participating in a replica of one right now, where if you're anything like Kruglansky's participants, you're seeing two triangles. Here's the interesting thing. Triangle 2 is upsetting you. Kruglansky measured this. Breathing, pulse, galvanic skin response. Your body signals stress because your brain wants the pattern to be complete. At a deep psychological level, human beings have what Kruglansky called a need for closure. Confronted with an uncertain situation, we yearn to find an answer. And the priority is speed, not accuracy. Apply this to a social setting. I meet new people. I don't know much about them. At some level, that's scary. The uncertainty makes me uncomfortable, so my brain wants to categorize quickly. What's the quickest answer? Simplify. Invoke stereotypes. We're so used to doing this, we don't even have to meet people in real life. Just hearing the word stereotype was probably enough for you to call up stereotypes for the people in this stock image. When you heard the word terrorist, you probably had an image in mind as well. Where did that image come from? We aren't born with these stereotypes, so where do we learn them? That's why the second factor is habit. Specifically, it's our learning habits. It's how we're used to finding out about new things. A few months after those attacks in 1993, I started primary school. I sat in a class, and a teacher told me about how the world works, and I tried to write down everything she said. Then I wrote exams where I wrote whatever I remembered, and a few exams later, when I was a little older, my teacher told me what I'd learned earlier was a little too simple. That the true model was a little more complicated because there was one more variable to consider. The late British novelist Terry Pratchett once called teaching the honorable profession of telling lies to children. Think about it. At one point of time, everyone in this room had no idea where babies come from. And until somebody taught us, we believed simple stories. We believed this. And it seems funny now because we replaced it with a more sophisticated understanding. And we did that so long ago, we don't even remember doing it. That's all our learning habits in a nutshell. Start with a simple version, also known as a lie, and then add in more variables to bring it closer to the truth. Except that the truth is a model that can encompass an unknown but potentially infinite number of variables. So relative to reality, all of our understandings are simplifications. And you would think after having gone through this process time and time again as we have, we'd start to suspect that our understandings are always missing something, that there's always one more variable. We don't seem to. And partly that's because always paying attention to what's missing is stressful. Partly it is because we forget what we discarded. Partly it's because of the third factor, ignorance. We don't know what we don't know yet. Our brains are biased in favor of easily available information. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls this tendency, what you see is all there is. When the information at hand presents a simple answer, one that completes the pattern, it doesn't occur to us to think about what might still be missing, because we can embrace that simple answer with conviction. When somebody is convicted as a terrorist, that label tells us everything we want to know. Again, simplicity is a cognitive virtue. Accuracy is not. Another personal story. I have a friend who was born with one arm. This rarely slows her down. But I do sometimes notice there are things I take for granted that she finds a little more challenging to do. And after we hang out, I might continue to notice these things till the end of the day. Then I go to bed, wake up, and return to my oblivious two-armed life. I told her about this. And she said, hey, there are times when I'm holding something in my hand, and my mom will ask me to hold something else. She gave birth to me, a baby with one arm. And even she forgets at times. We can't even keep track of how different the world is for our children, our parents, and our friends. Now try to imagine what the world looks like for someone you've never met, never been acquainted with, never spoken to. Robert Putnam is a Harvard professor who studied how the experiences of children in the United States diverge based on their parents' levels of income and education. In this graph, for instance, he measures the percentage of children who've lived in a single-parent household. So imagine one of your parents is missing. You don't know where they are. The blue line is children whose mothers graduated college. The orange line is children whose mothers studied at most until high school. The difference, as you can see, is incommensurable and growing. Here is what Putnam has to say about growing up poor in America today. He says, take away the parents who drive you to soccer, the peers you know who went off to college, the neighbors who happen to need a summer intern, and childhood is bewildering. The privileged kids don't just have a wider set of options. They have adults who tailor for them a set of options that exclude all of the bad ones. This brings us to the critical point. Complexity is an inverse function of power. Let me say that again. Complexity is an inverse function of power. The lives we live are simplified for us by those who love us and want to protect us and have the power to do so. And not being aware of that simplification is ignorance. But not having to be aware of it is privilege. Demanding and consuming simple answers. Refusing to engage with the complexity of others' lived experiences. Dismissing them because we can't relate to them. This is how we maintain our privilege. It's particularly important, I think, to address this at a TEDx event, because in some ways the TED format is all about big, bright, simple ideas. That's part of its appeal. I love these talks. I learn a lot from them. I've learned so much today. They inspire me. Sometimes they inspire me to try to change my life, which usually turns out to be really hard to do. The idea is simple. The implementation is really complex. And if it's that hard for me and you, who can attend and watch these talks, try to imagine how hard it might be for somebody on the wrong side of Putnam's graphs. What can we change? By now, you know not to expect simple answers. If there is an answer, though, it might begin with this. We have to train ourselves to listen, especially when we want to dismiss. Make no mistake, this is hard. There's a voice in our heads that says, I have an answer. It's simple. It fits. If I listen to something new right now, it might shatter this comfortable illusion of certainty I have built up. So let's not do that, okay? Learn to expect that voice. And every time you hear it, ignore it. Ask the questions that challenge your understandings. Ask the questions that make your life more complicated. Ask the questions that show you how complex life can be. Because for us, today, that's all this is. A question. A thought experiment. For somebody else, it can be so much more. In at least one case, it was a matter of life and death. Thank you.